This is Mariah Cruz, and you're listening to the Spiritual Deep Dives podcast. For thousands of years, there were ancient spiritual truths and mystical teachings passed down only to the highest initiates walking the path back to God. It hasn't been until recent times that this secret knowledge has been available to the masses. Our team spent over 40 years researching many diverse spiritual, religious, and scientific sources, recording the wisdom from the ascended saints and sages of East and West, tapping into the Akashic records and calling on God's Holy Spirit to reveal the spiritual truths and science behind the unseen forces that govern our lives. In this podcast, we will explore these teachings from a unique perspective that you probably have never heard before and show practical ways you can integrate them into your life to resolve deep-seated personal problems, accelerate your soul's evolution, and help solve the world's dilemmas. Welcome to episode 3 of our eye-opening series on fallen angels, Nephilim, and aliens. In this episode, Joseph and Stephen Macchio will uncover the mysterious fall of Lucifer, not as a myth, but as a cosmic event revealed through scripture and the Akashic records. Join us as we explore how Lucifer, once a divine light-bringer, ultimately chose rebellion over divine service. We will discuss the laws of free will for angels in heaven and reveal hidden truths about our matter universe from a spiritual perspective. This episode is packed with ancient wisdom, esoteric insight, and will give you a deeper understanding of the eternal battle between light and darkness. I want to quickly mention that if you're joining us for the first time, we encourage you to listen to the first 2 episodes of this series because each new episode builds on the foundation of all previous ones. So I'll read what Joseph and Stephen have to share with us today. Thank you for joining us in what promises to be an eye-opening episode about Lucifer, who many of you know is the archangel who rebelled against God and subsequently was cast out of heaven. As a backdrop to this topic, we wanted to first give a little more commentary on the scene from the movie Star Wars that we played in episode 2, where General Palpatine was talking privately with Anakin Skywalker during a celestial concert. In conjunction with this scene, we had mentioned that the fallen angels can manipulate karma. We want to explain this concept by way of showing how this was illustrated in that movie scene. In it, the brilliant mind, the intellectualism of Palpatine, was able to sway and interfere with Anakin's free will, thus manipulating the natural cycles of his personal karma and the trajectory of his life, which ended up aborting his entire divine plan. Anakin was supposed to bring balance to the Force, but instead, he turned to the dark side, and from there we know the rest of the story. You have the brilliant mind of the fallen angel Palpatine planting seeds of doubt, changing Anakin's thoughts and beliefs just enough so he would do what Palpatine wanted him to do. Palpatine's demonstrated use of human intellectualism was brilliant. He had an answer for everything. This is the point we're trying to make about the manipulation of someone's karma. Our individual karma opens us up to vulnerabilities. In Anakin's case, his vulnerability was the fear of his mother's death, as well as rebellion. So this movie scene demonstrates how people can be manipulated into doing unspeakable things. The fallen ones target our vulnerabilities in order to move us away from our divine purpose in this life and the balancing of our karma. So we're going to move on from this movie and dig into Hebrew scriptures, which is about the fallen angels, who they are, and specifically where they are. We need to begin here for a starting point, and there's no better place to begin than the Book of Isaiah, copies of which were found at Qumran. In the Book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verses 12 through 18, we will read a translation from the Jerusalem Bible. How did you come to fall from the heavens, day star, son of dawn? How did you come to be thrown to the ground, you who enslaved the nations, you who used to think to yourself, I will climb up to the heavens, higher than the stars of God, I will set my throne, I will rival the Most High. What now? You have fallen to Sheol, to the very bottom of the abyss. All who see you will gaze at you, will stare at you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble and overthrew kingdoms? Who made the world a desert and levelled cities? The original Hebrew name for the individual in this passage is Helel ben Shahar, which was translated to Day Star, Son of Dawn in this Bible. So who is this Day Star, Son of Dawn? If we go back to the Latin Vulgate, a late 4th century Latin translation of the Bible, we get the name Lucifer, or light bringer, from this name. And we also find it interesting that Lucifer is also an ancient name for the planet Venus. So both Hebrew and English versions of this passage relate to the planet Venus. Why did we mention this? You'll find out later. We want to make the point that when doing research for this type of content, it's important to go back to the original languages it was written in. Sometimes you have to go to the root and then come forward from there to clearly see the true meaning of certain passages. The Jerusalem Bible calls him Day Star, Son of Dawn. The King James Version uses Lucifer. In later centuries, many of the so-called church fathers and scholars came to a consensus saying, this prideful individual was none other than an archangel who had rebelled against the Most High. The ascended masters have revealed to us that yes, this Helel ben Shahar, this Lucifer, was at the archangelic level, however he was not in the ascended state. This is a very important point. A large number of people believe that once you've made it to heaven, or if you were already in heaven as the angels and archangels are thought to be, how could you possibly fall? Yet a fall did indeed happen. To discover how this could have possibly happened, we need to consider the fact that angels have a slightly different kind of free will than embodied man. You see, we humans can make our own free will choices, but angels must carry out the free will of whichever hierarch they are working under. Understanding this concept helps us to comprehend how, even in heaven, rebellion could be reasoned within those ranks. We also need to consider that there are other cosmic laws in play in these situations. One of these states that if an angel rebels against the will of the hierarch they are meant to carry out, then they are required to take embodiment. They must embody on Earth, on another planet, or another plane of physical existence. Rebellion is on a different level than just occasionally making a mistake. Whereas a mistake can be corrected and the angel repolarized, rebellion is a far more serious matter to the heavenly hierarchy. So, what we are revealing here is what the ascended masters have told us is the reason the great angelic rebellion happened so long ago, which was recorded in the Bible and other ancient scriptures that we will soon disclose. Now, let's circle back to the point we made about Archangel Lucifer not being in the ascended state as we dissect part of the passage we read from Isaiah. So in Isaiah, Lucifer says, I will rival the Most High. Who is the Most High? This is the hierarch under which Lucifer was working. It was the being whose will he was supposed to carry out. Interestingly, this statement that Lucifer made is similar to a passage in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna talks about the difference between the so-called demonic and light personalities. The asuras that Krishna mentions are the fallen ones. In chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, these asuras claim, I am the Lord Ishvara, I am the Lord. They are basically saying the same thing that Lucifer said in Isaiah. These beings did not become the Lord, their higher self. They had become a separate entity, rivaling the powers and authority of their hierarch. This concept ties into what we discussed in episode 2 about Maya and the illusion of separateness. Also, as we go through this episode and the ones that will follow, we're going to see that this thread of core rebellion by an individual or groups of individuals against God runs through all of the major religions. It should be abundantly clear from what we've said so far that this son of dawn wound up on earth and was a king or a ruthless conqueror. Here's part of the passage in Isaiah again. Is this the man who made the earth tremble and overthrew kingdoms? You who enslaved the nations, who made the world a desert and leveled cities. This is very interesting because we wouldn't normally attribute someone like Lucifer being on the earth as an embodied individual who could have even been recorded in history. As we will soon see, that is exactly what happened. Many in the Christian community think this passage says that Lucifer ended up somewhere in hell, wherever that is, and that's where he's been for all eternity, but they don't read it clearly. What they've done is whitewashed it and reinterpreted it to mean something else. It clearly says, "Is this the man?" This son of dawn had taken embodiment on earth as a king. However, before he was a king, he was cast into hell. Isaiah says, "You have fallen to Sheol, to the very bottom of the abyss." Sheol is Greek for Hades. In English, it means hell. As mentioned, assumptions are made that if someone is put somewhere, they have to stay there. But Lucifer didn't stay in hell. Let's talk a little more about this. Some people interpret hell to be the astral plane or various levels of it. This podcast had an excellent series about death and discarnates that went into great detail about this very topic. Many people who are into esoteric studies are also familiar with what the astral plane is. If we end up there, there's nothing that says we're remanded there forever and can never get out. The fact is, we can move from the astral plane to the earth plane. So Lucifer didn't stay in hell where he was originally cast into from out of the heaven world. Where did he go? He took birth in the flesh. Again, Isaiah says, "Is this the man?" We have now come to a key point in this episode where the Ascended Masters reveal the revelation that blows open the story that we're piecing together. So here it is. According to the Akashic records, the Ascended Masters teach us that Lucifer took birth as King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who among other things destroyed Jerusalem and exiled the Jewish people to Babylon. Considering the time frame when the book of Isaiah was written, this is a huge revelation. When you read of all the things that this king did, you will see what his motives were and realise that we had someone in embodiment who was worse than General Palpatine from Star Wars. Things did not go well under King Nebuchadnezzar. It's worth noting that he went through a 7-year period of insanity where he believed he was an animal. And at the end of his life, he pretended to acknowledge God's sovereignty. This king was not, quote, an ordinary king. The important point is, the fallen ones are not always so evil all the time that it's obvious to everyone. They often play both sides of the coin when they're in embodiment. They could be nice, they could be evil, they could be both, and no one will be the wiser, which is the brilliancy of what he knows he's doing. Now, as promised, we're going to make another important connection with this fallen archangel, and that's to the planet Venus. As mentioned earlier, the name Lucifer refers to this planet. So, again, what's the connection? Why Venus? To answer this question, we have to go back to some of the ancient esoteric traditions that were first revealed in the Theosophical movement that we discussed in episode 1, and then were continued by the Ascended Masters' teachings through the Summit Lighthouse that we study today. What was revealed is that Venus is a more highly evolved planet than Earth. All planets go through a spiritual evolution and development, as do people, and also as do the sons and daughters of God. Obviously, when we look at the planet physically, there's nothing going on there, but we're not talking about the physical or the astral planes. We're talking about the higher, vibrating etheric plane and above, which is still in the levels of matter. So what happened on Venus? Why is Lucifer now called Lightbringer? Why is he called Venus? Well, in the far distant past, divine beings from Venus bestowed mind, intelligence, and the divine spark upon mankind on Earth during the course of their evolution and development. These divine beings from Venus are called the Kumaras, which means youths. This comes from the Sanskrit word Kumara, Kumara. There are 7 Kumaras, but many beings work under them. These Kumaras were working with the evolution of consciousness on Earth and on other planets for millions of years. This is their function. Mark Prophet explained where Lucifer comes into the picture. With the 7 holy Kumaras came also Lucifer, the son of the morning, and when Lucifer came with the Kumaras from Venus, he was acting according to the patterns of divine love. This is extraordinarily important information from the Akashic records. We are talking about a time long before his fall when Lucifer was following the correct patterns of what he was meant to do. As an archangel, he was carrying out the will of the Kumaras who needed certain things to happen on planet Earth. Lucifer was also the leader of various bands of angels called the Luciferians who faithfully followed and served under him. Many people don't realise that there's a tremendous order and hierarchy in the heaven world, which includes many orders of angels, each with unique roles and characteristics. In other words, down through this divine order, there are special dispensations from God that come forth through the Kumaras. We can think of the archangels as heavenly architects who plan, design and oversee the creation of the Kumaras' vision, and the angels serving under the archangel implement those plans and designs to fulfill the Creator's will. So now that we uncovered where Lucifer came from and his original mission, let's now get into what happened, which initiated his fall and the fall of his legions of angels. You're going to find this very interesting. To briefly recap, long before his defection, Lucifer was a light bringer to the earth. He was dwelling in the heaven world, but not in the ascended state. He was at the archangelic level and brought consciousness to man. With the holy Kumaras, he brought the divine spark and helped bestow man's divinity. So what spawned the pride which reportedly caused his fall? He must have become tainted in some way. How was he turned, and more importantly, who turned him to the dark side? We're going to tell you who it was with the story of another individual that the Ascended Masters opened up the Akashic records on in order to help us piece together this entire scenario. What you are about to hear unlocks a monumental revelation about the beginnings of the biblical fall of Lucifer that most have not heard until now. As we proceed, please keep in mind the commentary we gave in episode 2 from the Star Wars movie clip, because those concepts closely relate to what follows next. What the Masters have revealed is that there was a mighty king known as Peshualga, who, like Lucifer, also dwelled in the heaven world as an unascended being. They didn't tell us what planet he was from, but he was a great initiate of the wisdom schools of the Great White Brotherhood and was also well acquainted with Archangel Lucifer. Now, what happened is, tragedy struck Peshualga. He lost his son, which caused him to start down the left-handed path. Here's what the Ascended Masters tell us. When his son passed away, Peshualga prayed for him to be restored back to life. When he was not returned, Peshualga became angry and so engaged in condemnation of the divine, of God, accusing him of evil for allowing his son to die. I wanted to pause the Makio's talk briefly and add that when there's the loss of a loved one, especially if they are very young, we can imagine it would be very difficult to accept that this was the will of God. We may even want to blame God. These kinds of initiations are ongoing throughout one's life, even in the heaven world. Some people believe that all of their testings and initiations only happen here on earth, and once you get to heaven, you're all finished. But the Ascended Masters tell us that spiritual evolution doesn't end when we leave the earth plane and go to other levels, wherever that may be. When we enter the path back to God, we're always in the process of evolving into something beyond what we are at this moment. The testing and initiations continue. Through that evolutionary process, we have free will choices. Bad things happen in life and tragedy strikes. The test is, how are we going to react to these tests when they come? Are we going to keep loving God and move forward, or are we going to curse him and fall away? This is something to think about. Let's continue with their talk. So we have a situation where this individual, who was a king and had a fair amount of attainment, loses his son. We want to point out that the Ascended Masters give different kinds of tests designed to expand consciousness. In Peshualga's case, he did not consider the continuity of life. If someone passes from the screen of life, there is really no death. That person will be back. For Peshualga, it was a matter of surrendering to divine law, which he failed to do. So what did Peshualga do instead? He swore vengeance against the entire spiritual hierarchy, his own ascended mentor, and ultimately God and the cosmic beings themselves. Instead of overcoming his rage, he slipped into a lack of reason, a lack of full sanity. Now, the rest of the story gets even more incredible. The next thing that Peshualga did was try to restore his son back to life by contacting the forces of darkness which already existed. This is a huge statement that the Ascended Masters made, which means he was aware of these forces, he knew where to go. And these forces of darkness were able to use the same light for the dark side in ways other than what it would normally be used for, and they were going to try to restore his son. So we can imagine the scene where Peshualga was calling in all of these various individuals who knew the black arts. This mirrors what General Palpatine was suggesting to Anakin in the Star Wars movie clip. It shows that there's a force, an energy that can either be used for good or it can be used to manipulate someone's karma, to change an initiation. So that's exactly what Peshualga did. He was supposed to go through this initiation of losing his son, but he was determined to change his circumstance by summoning practitioners of the black arts and using divine energy in a different way that was not natural or lawful in a bid to resurrect his son back to life. We don't know how far back this event happened, but it was certainly millions of years ago. So the beings that Peshualga contacted had already made a choice to misuse the light and defect to the dark side, the left-handed path. They practiced their black arts to help Peshualga, but his son was never resurrected. Now, according to what the Ascended Masters revealed from the Akashic records, Peshualga contacted Lucifer, expressing his anger against God, along with his supporting logic, which eventually infected him. There had to be something that caused Lucifer to listen to and become negatively influenced by Peshualga, just as there was something in Anakin that made him susceptible to General Palpatine's influence. In our next episode, we will go into detail about the psychology and motives behind what caused Lucifer to ultimately enter into a state of rebellion. As mentioned, Lucifer was directly involved in the holy evolution of man under the Kumaras. Man was made in the image of the divine Son. He was instructed to worship and make obeisance to the divine image in man and be a servant of the sons of God. But somewhere along the line, he decided that he was no longer going to serve man. Lucifer rebelled against the will of God. He said, "I will not serve the divine image in man." After all, he played a part in bestowing man's divinity, so why should he now turn around and be subordinate to what he helped evolve? And you could imagine what the angels serving under Lucifer said. Well now, why do we have to work with that which we also helped to evolve? They started questioning their own judgment and role, which was to carry out these processes in the long evolutionary cycle of developing man. To reiterate, although this event took place in the heaven world, neither Peshualga or Lucifer were in the ascended state. They were vulnerable to Mayic illusion, which can cloud one's judgment and perception, a concept we discussed in episode 2. In conclusion, it's also important to note that people may think that once they're in heaven, they're sealed, they're safe, and don't have to worry about anything. But this only happens at the point of the ascension, which is a process whereby there's a fusing of the soul, the universal Christ, and the divine source as one, something we discussed in episode 1. This fusion is an evolutionary stage that we reach where even though we maintain free will and maintain our individuality, we are sealed and can no longer fall for the ploys of someone like Peshualga or any part of Maya. Thank you for listening. Don't miss our next eye-opening episode, where Stephen and Joseph will explore Lucifer's motives for rebelling against the divine Son, his fall from grace, and the cascading descent of millions of angels into the lower planes of matter. Drawing from the Book of Revelation, esoteric texts, and teachings of the ascended masters, they reveal how pride, jealousy, and intellectualism led to a cosmic war, one still playing out today. We'll discover the hidden meanings behind the red dragon mentioned in Revelation, the tail that drew down the stars, the denial of reincarnation by the fallen ones, and the deeper symbolism of the devil, the energy veil, and the mysterious vortex of darkness. Thank you for listening to Spiritual Deep Dives. If you like this content, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll catch you in episode 4.